It's now time to introduce our special guest. We're happy to have with us tonight Steve Blake, ScD. Steve Blake, ScD, is part of the clinical and research faculty at Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience, and he is finishing a clinical study at Hawaii Alzheimer's Disease Center. He has presented grand rounds at the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii and at Boston University Medical Center. He has authored Parkinson's Disease, Dietary Regulation of Dopamine, Vitamins and Minerals Demystified by McGraw-Hill, a nutritional approach to Alzheimer's disease, alternative remedies, published by Mosby. He's co-authored Mosby's Drug Guide for Nurses, 4th edition, and created the Diet Doctor software to analyze dietary nutrients. He currently lives on an organic farm on Maui with his wife, Catherine. His presentation tonight is entitled Neuroscience Nutrition in Parkinson's Disease. Please join me in welcoming Steve Blake, ScD.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was nice. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I've got a talk for you tonight on Parkinson's disease. My wife and I work at Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience, which has facilities at the Castle Medical Center and St. Francis Laliha here in Honolulu. And we've seen many people with Parkinson's disease, and of course those of you familiar with it know that our medical system treats it with drugs. I'm going to talk about nutrition in Parkinson's disease, and it's something that most American medical doctors don't really look at nutrition too hard. They don't really read the nutrition journals, and they don't generally give a lot of nutrition advice. So it's kind of fun for me because this is an area where nobody's looking for solutions to the various neurologic disorders. And there's another reason they're not looking is because there's no profit in it whatsoever. It's food, it's nutrients, it's things that you can patent and sell for trillions of dollars. But for me, it's really exciting. There's 3 ways, in general, that food can help with Parkinson's disease. And the first way is really interesting, and I'm going to tell you more about each of these 3 ways, is that excess protein in the diet can interfere with the absorption and transport to the brain of tyrosine, which is a raw material for dopamine. Even the drug Levodopa or L-Dopa, high protein levels interfere with it. Well, does anyone get high protein levels? As Lorraine mentioned, I have a dietary software that I make for analyzing diets, and I often see protein levels of 100 to 150 grams per day, but probably everyone in this room needs something like 50 grams per day. Even whole food vegans tend to get a bit too much protein. In other words, it's very hard and rare for anyone to get too little protein if they're just eating enough calories. It's very rare. So the first way is to adjust protein so that you can make more dopamine. It's really pretty simple when you look at it, and I'll explain that in detail. I also ask myself, why is it that people get Parkinson's disease? What's killing off those brain cells that make dopamine? And there are specific pollutants that go right to those brain cells and either kill the brain cell or inactivate the enzymes that make the dopamine. So I want to tell you what those specific pollutants are so you can avoid them. Now, this might be good for all of us, not just people with Parkinson's disease. And the third step is neuroprotection. Let's protect our brain from any kind of neurodegeneration. One of the keys is more antioxidants and less inflammation. So I'll talk about those as we go along too. Now, Parkinson's disease, you can see on the slide, in the midbrain, there's the substantia nigra. Nigra means black, and it has black fibers. They're the ones that make the dopamine. The substantia nigra, the part of it called the pars compacta, is the only place we can make dopamine in the brain that will work to help with movement disorders. So that's where it has to happen. That's the only place. If you're low in dopamine, now what if you have half the dopamine-producing cells that you were supposed to have? You may not show any signs or symptoms at all. Typically, Parkinson's disease is diagnosed when 60 to 70% of the dopamine-producing cells are already gone. What that means is that people in this room without Parkinson's disease may also be down 10% or 20% or even 40 or 50% of the dopamine-producing cells in our brains may already have died. So we certainly don't want to lose those extra ones that will give us tremors, rigidity, and the other symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Be nice to avoid that, wouldn't it? A lot of the studies that I look at, they talk a lot about risk reduction for Parkinson's disease, but it's the same thing as reducing progression in Parkinson's disease. You lower your risk by keeping your dopamine-producing cells from dying, and you lower your progression by keeping your dopamine-producing cells from dying. So it's really very similar. We want to protect the remaining dopamine-producing cells in all of our brains, and some of you may know that dopamine is used for many other things besides movement. It has effects on mood and many other things. It's a good one. So I'll show you the signs of Parkinson's disease. Often there's a hunch forward that you may notice, and it's not a skeletal deformity or anything. It's about the balance of a person. And some physical therapists work with the balance because when Parkinson's disease, you feel like if you leaned back, you'd fall over. In fact, that's one of the tests that our neurologists use to check for Parkinson's disease. A mask-like face can develop over time. If people have dimples and active faces, then it's less likely that they have Parkinson's disease, or at least that manifestation of it. Tremors can occur anywhere, lips, fingers, feet, almost anywhere in the body, or whole shoulders and arms. It just varies. The tremors are especially annoying, and they're one of the symptoms that people really like to have go away. And then there's bradykinesia. It means slow movement. Slow movements can be really annoying, and in advanced Parkinson's disease, they can be make it very difficult to do the activities of daily life. So we would like to help with these different manifestations of Parkinson's disease. There are several stages, and typically a neurologist will say that it's a neurodegenerative disease and you're going to get worse and worse and worse. However, I'm more optimistic, and my goal would be to stop the progression of Parkinson's disease. That's my goal. We just finished a trial called the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial at Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience, and it was successful using nutrition to stop the progression of mild cognitive impairment into dementia. In fact, it was kind of interesting that the people with mild cognitive impairment became normal in their cognitive abilities with proper nutrition. So to me, that's very positive, and I think similar things have happened and can happen with Parkinson's disease. So I know I don't want to throw out too much hope, but I'm a hopeful person, and I've seen wonderful things happen. And so let's work toward those miracles, okay? There's a Hone and Yar scale where 1, you barely notice anything with Parkinson's, like tremors or rigidity. And then there's the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. It covers different areas, and some of the more bothersome aspects of Parkinson's disease may be problems with thinking, memory, and cognition. This is Lewy body dementia. Lewy body dementia can occur in a variant of Alzheimer's disease by itself, and about 1/3 of people with advanced Parkinson's disease may notice some signs of Lewy body dementia, which is trouble thinking and remembering. Another thing we'd like to avoid, I just want to tell you that one person we worked with, we saw him for the first time, and his breakfast, because in Parkinson's disease, people tend to get too thin as they progress with the disease. So his wife was feeding him bacon and eggs and hash browns for breakfast, a big pile of food for breakfast every morning, and similar kind of food for lunch and dinner, really heavy food. Well, we talked to him about nutrition, and when he came back a month later, he had only changed breakfast. Okay, that's pretty good. He had oatmeal and avocado for breakfast instead of bacon and eggs, and so on. So we asked his wife, has there been any improvement? And she said, yes, about a 25% improvement just from changing breakfast in both motor problems and thinking. And we asked her, how long did it take for this improvement to occur? She said the next day. And this is what the science is showing too, is that it's pretty quick. So I think that's very heartening. Exercise can really improve people with Parkinson's disease. I encourage people to get a good physical therapist program, work with people. There are many different physical therapy techniques. Ballroom dancing has been shown scientifically to really help. You got someone to hang on to, you know, as you move, and it's fun and romantic, and the movement patterns seem to make it easier to walk and walk faster afterwards. So this talk is not about exercise, but I had to mention it. Look at this fancy apparatus that they're using so that there's no chance of falling down during exercise, which is rather important. I'm going to tell you about a doctor's office who specializes in Parkinson's disease, and the waiting room was full. And this old lady walked in with a cane, and she looked like this. She was all hunched over. Well, they let her go right on in to see the doctor. 2 minutes later, she walks out like this. Well, everyone in the waiting room just clustered around and said, what drug did he give you? What wonder drug was it? And she said, drug? No, he gave me a longer stick. So maybe drugs aren't the only answer. The standard of care for Parkinson's disease is levodopa, and in more advanced cases, levodopa is absolutely needed. What's interesting is that my program with protein really helps absorption of levodopa and helps with the fluctuations. I want to tell you what I mean by fluctuations. In beginning Parkinson's disease, the levodopa may be taken, say, at 6 a.m., at noon, and then at 6 p.m. Okay, 6-hour intervals. What is desired is that the morning dose will keep the tremors and slowness from occurring until the noon dose kicks in, and that will last. But what if it wears out at 11:30 a.m.? That's called a fluctuation or an off state. And that means that a person is suffering their symptoms again before the medication comes in. Well, over time, the medication gets pushed closer together. So maybe 4-hour intervals, 3-hour intervals. We worked with one guy that had Parkinson's for 35 years, wonderful old guy, and he was taking medication every hour and different medications every hour just to keep up with it. When we met him, he was falling down every day, and he went on the program. I've got a quote from his wife in the slideshow today. And he quit falling and was able to do woodwork again, and he really got better. He was on lots of medications, but the dietary part helped him too. So I'm not saying just do diet, except in the early stage where you may be able to avoid it. I worked with one man, John, who had real bad tremors. He said it was really embarrassing, his hand tremors, and he didn't want to take the drugs, and he hadn't taken any yet. So he worked with nutrition, and over the course of a few months, his tremors went completely away. His mask also went away, and his face became mobile, and I saw dimples last time I saw him. That was very heartening. In fact, I dedicated my book on Parkinson's disease to him, because he did such a beautiful job in correcting the situation. A little science here for you, how dopamine is made. You start out with tyrosine is how we're supposed to make dopamine. Tyrosine, it's inhibited by excess protein. But if you don't have excess protein, the tyrosine will find its way into your bloodstream, into your brain, and into the area where dopamine is made. And tyrosine hydroxylase, an enzyme, transforms that tyrosine into levodopa. Or you can take levodopa as a drug, as I mentioned. Then levodopa is transformed into dopamine if that enzyme, aromatic L-amino acid decarboxylase, is working. And many of the environmental pollutants damage or destroy these enzymes, and that's very hopeful. Isn't that bizarre? It's hopeful because that means the cells aren't dead. The enzymes are inactivated, which gives you a possibility that if you can quit polluting your brain, that the enzymes can then become able to work again, and then you'll produce more dopamine rather than less. So that's actually a hopeful thing. I don't look at anyone having a bad diet. I look for room for improvement so that our health can get better. Then dopamine is finally broken down by monoamine oxidase, number 2, and that's also given as a drug to slow the breakdown of dopamine. Okay, I'm going to talk about the dietary regulation first. My wife has a cookbook on the right, and I have a book on Parkinson's disease. You need a way to implement the suggestions. My wife and I have a philosophy that the food has to be tasty and economical and easy to prepare if you want people to change. So that's how you do it. This study showed that higher levels of protein block levodopa entry into the brain. Not just tyrosine, but levodopa in this case. Even if blood levels of levodopa are adequate, it can be blocked. Now, I checked, and all of the essential amino acids use this large neutral amino acid transporter, both from the stomach into the bloodstream and from the bloodstream into the brain, across the blood-brain barrier. So if you have too much protein, then you're not going to be able to get your drug into the brain where it needs to be. This study showed that they cut their motor problems in half. They walked twice as good. Their tremors were half as bad. What did she do? She lowered protein. But what's amazing is that while most Americans eat 100, 150, even 200 grams of protein a day, she had already gotten the study participants down to 67 grams of protein before they started the study. They were on a plant-based breakfast and a plant-based lunch, and they ate omnivorously at dinner time. Well, half of them, she switched over to eat plant-based at dinner too, dropping their protein down to just about 50. That's not a huge change. And both the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale and the Hone and Yar scale showed about 50% better. You know, it doubled their scores. Just that. Is that unbelievable that food can do that? A couple more studies on the same thing. A plant-based diet helped after only 1 week. It's very rapid. Both tyrosine and levodopa were more effectively absorbed and transported to the brain. You can think of it with H1 here, you can think of an analogy. The stomach wants to get the tyrosine and levodopa into the bloodstream like an on-ramp to a freeway. If it's crowded, you can't get the tyrosine and the levodopa cars into the freeway. And then when the freeway gets to the brain and there's an off-ramp to the brain, it's very hard if it's all jammed up, you know, 530, H1, the tyrosine cars can't get into the brain, so they keep going around in the body, and the levodopa causes more side effects if it keeps going around in the body rather than getting to the target area. Another study showed a low but adequate protein diet significantly prolonged the effectiveness of levodopa therapy. Now, the beauty of that is that's going to reduce fluctuations in off time. So you may actually be able to take your medication a little further apart rather than closer and closer together as the years go on. And that too is a big relief to people. A Brazilian study looked at just reducing red meat, and they also added vitamin B2, riboflavin. After 6 months, they got a 60% improvement, but they got a 50% improvement in motor activity just after 3 months. Isn't that hopeful? So what we're suggesting is an adequate but not excessive protein intake. This is not too little protein. 50 grams of protein per day is generous and should, unless you're injured or pregnant or something else. Younger men may need a little bit more. If you're exercising hard, you generally will get more anyway because you eat more calories and get more protein that way. Now, another aspect of a plant-based diet is that the fiber in the plant smooths the digestion of the protein and also smooth the absorption of the levodopa so that it gets absorbed over a longer period of time, again reducing fluctuations and off times and improving the thing. one of the studies, they had to actually reduce the levodopa quantity and frequency because they didn't need it so much anymore, just by lowering their protein. As I mentioned, in advanced Parkinson's disease, people can get too thin. Well, I look at this as a tremendous advantage. Now, you don't want a lot of protein, but there's other ways to get a lot of calories. Well, okay, good question. Why are people with Parkinson's disease so thin? That's because the tremors and rigidity use up a lot of energy. And that energy also leads to more oxidation and oxidation byproducts and uses up more antioxidants, as does marathon running. So that's why, because the tightness of the muscles is burning energy to keep them tight. Good question. Now, we work with people with strokes and heart attacks and all kinds of other problems, and when you ask them to change their diet, they don't see immediate results. You know, they might feel a little better or lose a little weight or something. But with Parkinson's disease, it really makes a difference right away. So if people change their diet and they notice that they can walk twice as fast, and that's really good for them, or their tremors are half as bad or gone, they're much more likely to keep up the program. And it's so evident that if people go off the program, have a big steak at a barbecue or something, and after the steak they notice that their symptoms are much, much worse, you know, within 24 hours, that it's kind of self-regulating. Now, I mentioned an old guy we worked with, his wife said, "We plan to continue the diet, and it has been helpful to discover it's not as hard to do as we'd anticipated. There's nothing like good results to keep us motivated." So that's kind of why it's kind of fun, because you can get good results right away and keep them. And this is you doing the work. It's not a doctor, it's not a pharmaceutical company, it's you doing the work of eating a healthier diet in general, because lowering protein, where does excess protein come from? It comes from animal products. And what else do animal products have in them? Besides the pollutants I'm about to show you, they often have excess saturated fat, increasing the #1 killer heart attack and the #4 killer strokes, and also increasing vascular dementia. So now I'm going to tell you about why those dopamine-producing cells got killed off in the first place, and what foods we might find the contaminants that are killing our brain cells, but specifically these brain cells. You might consider eating organic food, especially if you have Parkinson's disease, because a big meta-study looked at 46 studies, and they found that more exposure to pesticides raised the risk of Parkinson's disease. Now, this is more in general. Among applicators, Parkinson's disease risk was 4 times higher, and with paraquat, 5 times higher. And rotenone, which is now banned, is even higher risk. Even the home use of pesticides can raise the risk of Parkinson's disease. Now, most of the focus is on organochlorine-type pesticides. However, the organophosphate pesticides like malathion, they are also implicated in, and it makes perfect sense that these particular pesticides would harm the brain, because after all, they're acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. They make the nerves fire more rapidly and not stop firing. So this causes imbalances in bugs and insects that it's designed to kill. It causes their lungs to lock up. So we're talking about something that locks up the muscles of insects, and it also, in human poisoning with organophosphates, it locks up the muscles. Good thing to avoid. There are many non-toxic approaches to home pesticide use, boric acid for cockroaches, for instance. This was a study that they looked at dieldrin. They took postmortem brains of Parkinson's disease patients, and they found this one organochlorine pesticide, dieldrin, was much higher compared to people without Parkinson's disease. It concentrates in fatty foods like animals, and then when people eat animals, it bioaccumulates in the humans. So dieldrin's a good one to avoid. More animal fat increased Parkinson's odds over 5 times from the Annals of Neurology. 5 times. That's 5 times the risk and 5 times the progression with animal fat. Now, why do people eat animal fat? Because it's tasty and because it's satisfying to the stomach. On the other hand, there's lots of other tasty food that's satisfying to the stomach too. So it might be a good idea to switch to other tasty, satisfying foods for all of us. I think this study in the Archives of Neurology looked at lindane, another organochlorine pesticide. These organochlorines are all very similar chemically. If you look at the middle column, that's how much they found in Parkinson's disease. These were serum tests, blood tests. If you look at the control, it was much lower, and even the Alzheimer's group, it was much lower. So they're finding specifically this lindane, the odds of getting Parkinson's 4.39 times as high. That's really a huge increase in risk. So you might want to rethink eating milk, eggs, dairy products, and fish to avoid getting these types of pesticides. In fact, milk, there's a large study, showed a decreased risk of Parkinson's disease with less dairy product consumption. People with the lowest dairy product consumption in this study had a 60% less likely risk to get Parkinson's disease. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, dairy products have a lot of protein. So you're bumping up the protein beyond what the level should be, and then you're having trouble absorbing your tyrosine and your levodopa. Also, they contain dieldrin and lindane. Dairy products also lower uric acid, and uric acid is a valuable antioxidant in the human body. You know, when milk first comes out of the cow, it starts bacteria growing in it, and that bacteria has to be killed right away. Flash freezing, sterilization, homogenization, all of these things are used routinely, and the problems with raw milk have often been bacterial contamination. Well, modern milk, they do kill the bacteria, but the leftover skeletons of the bacteria, it's quite a visual image there, floating around in the milk are called endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides. And in science, when you want to test a new drug against inflammation, what do you give the rats in order to get them inflamed? Endotoxins. So dairy products increase inflammation in the body too, and inflammation is not a good thing to have in the brain if you want to stop neurodegenerative disease. This study is a typical meta study. The tall bar, the black bar, shows zero effect. You notice that all of the studies relating dairy products to Parkinson's disease risk increase the risk. Some very much, some a little. The ones that didn't show a big effect was where some people were drinking 3 cups of milk a day and others were drinking 1 cup of milk a day, because it wasn't that big a difference. The study showing a much larger risk of people eating a lot of cheese and people eating no dairy products at all. But there are no studies showing a decrease in risk in Parkinson's disease. It's always an increase. That was the American Journal of Epidemiology in 2007. A Honolulu study showed a 2.3 times less Parkinson's disease in non-dairy product users versus dairy product users. Now, it's really easy not to eat dairy products these days. Almost everything. Almond milk, soy milk, especially the Silk brands, are quite delicious, and people don't mind switching. Earth Balance or one of the other butter substitutes seem to be, people happily will smear that on their toast or put it on their potatoes. Ice cream. It's almond ice cream and soy-based ice creams are delicious. You know, they're not health foods. They're fatty and sugary, but they don't have dieldrin and lindane in them. And they're lower in protein too. Now I want to talk about polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. These are pollutants that our chemical industry decided it would manufacture to keep transformers cool and very useful in the chemical industry, and they made a lot of this stuff knowing that it would never break down. Never is a long word. So far it hasn't, and they stopped producing it in 1977, and it's still ubiquitous in the environment, from the North Pole to the South Pole. It's everywhere. But it bioaccumulates in certain foods, and I'll show you those foods in a minute. It accumulates specifically in the brain. Now, they've been found to lower the production of dopamine, these PCBs, so I think we should avoid them. They inhibit tyrosine hydroxylase. That's the one that makes tyrosine into levodopa. So that's the way we all, with or without Parkinson's disease, should be making most of our dopamine. And that also means that if we stop eating polychlorinated biphenyls, we have a chance of those enzymes becoming active again and producing more dopamine, which is exactly what we would like to see. They also damage the other enzymes in the system, and they damage the dopamine transporter. Dopamine itself, unless it's transported and put in special little vesicles, little blisters in the nerve cell, can damage and kill the nerve cell. So polychlorinated biphenyls are very, very bad for the dopamine-producing area of the brain. They kill the cells, they inactivate the enzymes. In 1977, when PCBs were banned, they switched to PBDEs, polybrominated diphenyl esters, and ethers, excuse me, it's hard to say that word. It's just as bad. In fact, I think it's worse. It does all the same things. It kills off dopamine-producing cells, inactivates the good enzymes that make dopamine. Where do we find these things? Anyone identify the top bar there? That's fish oil. Fish oil has an amazing concentration of polychlorinated biphenyls and PBDEs. Fish is the highest source other than fish oil. Eggs and dairy products are also sources. Good reason not to eat eggs or dairy products. Baby food, heartbreakingly, contains it, as well as beef, and there's even some in vegetable oils. Now, there's a little line next to fruits, vegetables, and cereals. See that tiny line? There's almost none in fruits, vegetables, cereals, also beans, and most nuts and seeds. We'll be very, very low on those. There's no bioaccumulation going on with plants. So it might be a good idea to move down the food chain to whole plant foods rather than eating the bioaccumulated toxins that are found in animal products. One more thing to mention is mercury. Now, isn't it interesting that fish has been known as brain food maybe 100 years ago, but not anymore? You know where the mercury comes from that's in all the fish that goes into all of our brains and bodies? It comes from coal burning. You burn the coal, and the mercury floats over the ocean and drops in and moves up the chain, bioaccumulating up to 100,000 times in predatory species. So when people eat their albacore tuna, they're getting a massive dose of mercury, which is a neurotoxin. It increases oxidative stress and damages the mitochondria. Now, mitochondrial damage is very important in Parkinson's disease. In fact, in Alzheimer's disease and almost any neurodegenerative disease, the mitochondria are the energy factories of the brain. And when they die off, the brain cells die off too. And in the lab, when they're simulating Parkinson's disease with the chemical called MPTP for short, it kills off the mitochondria and produces Parkinson's-like problems. It's very rare for Parkinson's disease to be genetic, but when it is genetic, the genetic propensity is for the mitochondria to be damaged and not work well. Okay, now you've gone through the tough part. Let's talk about some foods that help. Fun, delicious foods. My philosophy is, first of all, do no harm. I took the Hippocratic Oath and I really meant it. By the way, I'm a scientist, not a medical doctor, in case you haven't noticed already. I work with medical doctors, I respect them, but I also think that food has its place in our health and nutrition. Soy genistein. Genistein is a flavonoid that's found in soy products, and it's best to get them organic for various reasons. It protects dopamine-producing neurons. Isn't this interesting? This genistein restored the tyrosine hydroxylase, that enzyme that makes levodopa from tyrosine. That's a good thing, if you can restore that. So we've got PCBs killing it off, and the lindane and the dieldrin from milk and cheese, and then we have the soy genistein. So if you're eating soy ice cream instead of dairy ice cream, you're really doing yourself a big favor making that switch. This is an anti-inflammatory substance, been very widely studied, and there are others like diadzine that are very, very similar. Protein in a cup of edamame is about 18, or a cup of soy milk 5. So edamame, a cup of edamame is very filling. You're not likely to eat a lot more for that meal of protein nature. So you can see if you had 3 meals of 18, you still wouldn't be much over 50 grams per day. It's not really that high a protein food. Certainly adequate. Sesamin from sesame seeds. Sesamin is a heat-activated antioxidant found in sesame seeds, or tahini is how we like to eat it. We found a source of organic tahini that's just absolutely delicious, and my wife has adapted many recipes to use that. it also increases the biosynthesis of tyrosine hydroxylase. So that enzyme that keeps getting killed off by environmental pollutants, well, this increases biosynthesis. This is really cool when you can get your genes to make something you need and make more of it instead of less. Epigenetics is what it's called. Sesamin decreased the oxidative stress because it is both antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. You'll notice that I have scientific citations on the bottom of each of these papers. This one came out in 2014, and it's a Journal of Aging Research and Clinical Practice. I feel that information should be traced to its source, so you know whether to trust it or not. In this day of Googling information and Facebooking information that is completely unreliable, it's really good to have solid, reliable scientific references, and just being peer-reviewed isn't enough. You really need to look closer. I collect peer-reviewed science like some people collect stamps, and I carefully look at who sponsored the study. If it's about food or nutrition, it makes a big difference. Sponsored studies have been found to almost always support the sponsor rather than the truth. Flavonoids, berries especially, are wonderful. Fruits and tea, like green tea, have a lot of flavonoids, and they've been found to be very protective. The big study, over 130,000 people, they followed for 20 years, and there's a big risk reduction for Parkinson's disease. People who ate more flavonoids, so berries, apples, oranges, and other fruits. We used a cup of berries in our clinical trial on Alzheimer's disease every day, blueberries, strawberries, any kind of berries, or red grapes. And that has been found to delay Alzheimer's disease an average of 2 years. Just that one intervention. And I designed the trial with 15 interventions, which in retrospect is probably too many dietary changes for most people, but we learn as we go. Black tea and green tea, as I mentioned. The caffeine itself may be helpful with Parkinson's disease, and then the flavonoids are very helpful with Parkinson's disease. Now this is interesting. Cigarettes reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease. So is there any alternative to going out and buying a pack of cigarettes? Cigarettes, we all know, they're really bad for your health, but they reduce the risk. The nicotine actually reduces the risk of Parkinson's disease quite sharply. Well, in this study, reported in the Annals of Neurology, they looked at people eating peppers. And people who had never smoked and ate more peppers, risk was reduced by 87%, pretty significant amount. So in my wife's cookbook, she's given me permission to share this recipe with you. It's called Best Friends. You chop up red peppers. Now, because peppers are sprayed a lot and right on the surface, they're in the dirty dozen of pesticide exposure, better get some organic ones if you have Parkinson's disease especially. So she chops those the same size, a little small, and cashews, really small. Mix them together, saute them lightly until they're browned, and they become best friends and make a delicious topping for anything. Potatoes, vegetables, you name it. Really wonderful. And while you're at it, you can lower your risk of Parkinson's disease and have a delicious topping to boot. It's really good. I've tried it. It's in her cookbook on Parkinson's disease, if you want the specifics. I want to mention what protects our brain. We mentioned what damages our brain. I want to mention what protects our brain. Now, a question we had was, why do people with Parkinson's disease burn up more calories? Well, closely related is why they need more antioxidants. Because rigidities and tremors create more reactive oxygen species, and tyrosine hydroxylase can create reactive oxygen. Metabolism of dopamine and neuroinflammation, these all increase oxidative stress, but we can combat that with nice plant foods. Is it interesting that plant foods have antioxidants and animal foods do not? I think that's an interesting thing. When they looked in the substantia nigra, the dopamine creating area of our brain, they found much more oxidation of the protein, of the lipids, even oxidation of the DNA in that area. So it might be a good idea to boost antioxidants, especially if you have Parkinson's disease, but I don't see any reason why the rest of us shouldn't do it as well. Selenium is important for one of our antioxidant enzymes called glutathione peroxidase. When dopamine is broken down, it creates hydrogen peroxide, and glutathione peroxidase takes hydrogen peroxide and converts it to water. So it takes a harmful substance and makes it go away. What if you're low in selenium? Doesn't happen. Then your brain cells die off quicker. Good idea not to be low in selenium. Now, analyzing diets as I do with my dietary software, I find that my diet and other diets where people work really hard to have good diets, some days they get enough selenium. You know, I ate a couple Brazil nuts that day. And other days I don't get enough selenium. So one way to do it is with a nutritional supplement. It has to be very carefully designed. Most supplements are made just for profit, and the forms and quantities of, they don't use selenomethionine, for instance, as their selenium form, which is the best studied and absorbed. You really need to get that right. Excess iron can increase oxidative stress. Normally, iron from plants, which have, especially green leafies, have a lot of iron in them, it's not absorbed. It's locked into the inside of the intestine, and it waits there. If your body needs iron, it pulls it into the body. If it doesn't, it leaves it alone and it goes away. So you never get too much iron because it can be damaging. With heme iron found in red meats, any blood-containing animals, including fish, the heme iron is absorbed whether or not you need it, can lead to an excess of iron and damage to the brain. So another good reason to leave red meats alone. I want to just give you the antioxidants. I wrote a college textbook for McGraw-Hill on vitamins and minerals. It's called Vitamins and Minerals Demystified. I don't have it here, but you know, Barnes & Noble or Amazon has it. It's under 20 bucks, I'm happy to say, for a textbook. It's really cheap. You can see from the list carotenoids found in fruits and vegetables. Vitamin C is an antioxidant found in fruits and vegetables. Vitamin E is found in nuts, seeds, and avocados, a little bit in olives. Fatty foods, in other words. Polyphenols are found in many plants like berries, also in teas. It's a huge class. And then our own antioxidants are superoxide dismutase, I abbreviated SOD there, and glutathione peroxidase. For those, you also need minerals. Manganese, zinc, copper, and selenium are needed. And you need them every day. You need them all day in order to protect yourself. Not just your brain, but all parts of your body from oxidation. This brain and body food I made for people at Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience who were not in our Hawaii Dementia Prevention trial, who were getting free supplements, and we couldn't give those supplements or sell them. They were just for the study. So we made these so people could get a high quality one. And the most challenging aspect was to get real vitamin E rather than the synthetic alpha tocopherol, which is potentially damaging. Analyzing diets, the standard American diet, low in vitamin C, vitamin E, and carotenoids. The Atkins diet, low in antioxidants, all of them. The Zone and Paleo diet, the South Beach diet, they got enough vitamin C, but not enough vitamin E and not enough carotenoids. Transition vegetarian diet, where people are eating a lot of eggs and cheese and noodles, didn't come out well for antioxidants either. In fact, potentially as damaging as a standard American diet. Mediterranean diet came out a little bit better with vitamin C, but yet almost enough vitamin E, and a little better on the carotenoids. The vegan whole food diet and the raw vegan diets got enough antioxidants across the board, these and others. But heart attack reduction diet, where fats are reduced to extremely low levels, didn't get enough vitamin E, and in fact, carotenoid absorption was hindered by the lack of a trigger to liver bile, so that the fat-soluble nutrients couldn't really be absorbed that well. In this study, vitamin E delayed progression of Parkinson's disease 2.5 years. Walnuts are a very good source of vitamin E because they have the gamma tocopherol form of vitamin E, and they have the essential omega-3 fatty acid. Pecans have the good form of vitamin E, but they don't have the essential fatty acid in very big quantities. So walnuts are just about supreme in this respect. They have to be fresh, of course, or they'll be rancid. Vitamin E and beta-carotene reduced oxidation. Vitamin E reduced risk by 55%. You know how many Americans are deficient in vitamin E? It's up to 93%. Don't even meet the bare minimum, much less enough to really protect their brain. So clearly, we're kind of in a tough spot. We either have to eat walnuts every day or take a supplement, but 99% of the supplements that I've seen I would not take because the vitamin E is not vitamin E at all. It's a synthetic fake that's bad for you. Some vegetables have been found to help with movement problems, especially the cruciferous vegetables are really helpful. Broccoli, kale, cauliflower, cabbage, these foods are very helpful. They have sulforaphane, which is an anti-inflammatory too. When you want to protect brain cells, you don't want excess inflammation in the brain. And boy, could I give a whole talk on that, but I guess I have to stop here and just say eat these cruciferous vegetables. They're healthy in 100 different ways. Treatment with sulforaphane in the lab reduced motor deficits and protected the dopaminergic neurons, dopamine-producing neurons in mice. I missed one dopaminergic. I gave this talk at Castle Medical Center as a grand rounds to doctors, and I had to only say dopaminergic and not dopamine producing because it's more complicated and doctors like big words. I also took out all the pictures, so it was more scientific. Berries keep dopamine producing neurons alive. I think I've mentioned berries a couple of times. They're really healthy. Try and eat some every day if you can. Other fruits are good too. Our papayas are bearing really well right now, and I'm eating about 2 papayas a day and loving it. Coenzyme Q10. Again, we did use coenzyme Q10 in our study to prevent dementia, and the study was successful. Coenzyme Q10 is normally produced in our bodies. However, statin drugs interfere with the production of coenzyme Q10. Statin drugs are very common drugs, and they reduce production of coenzyme Q10 about 40%. Now, coenzyme Q10 is part of the mitochondria, the electron transport chain. It's necessary to make energy, and it's the only fat-soluble antioxidant used in the human body, made in the human body. How many people here are not taking statin drugs? Raise your hand if you're not taking them. You're proud not to take them. Wow, that's one of the largest percentages I've seen. I'd say about 2/3 of the people in the room. Statin drugs, hydroxymethylglutaryl coenzyme A reductase inhibitors, do you like that word? They reduce the production in the body of mevalonate and farnesyl, which reduces 2 things, cholesterol and coenzyme Q10. And that's very dangerous. So good idea, if you're on statin medications, hopefully your doctor's already advised you to take coenzyme Q10. If you're on statin medications, you might seriously consider altering your diet to a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet that can lower your cholesterol. One lady we saw came to us 80 years old after a stroke. Her total cholesterol was 374. I mean, 220 is the average, and that's bad. Hers was 374. With dietary change alone and no drugs, it was down to 212 after 6 months. 6 months later, it was 145. She had moved into the heart attack stroke-proof zone, and that's a good place to be. And I think she's probably doing just fine. I have no doubts about her health at this point. So coenzyme Q10 is a supplement you might consider taking. It's normally produced in the body. There are no bad side effects when people take it. The IRB approved its use in elders, and so something to think about. Vitamin D is very important for us all. It is also important, it stabilizes Parkinson's disease motor symptoms. So you might consider getting enough vitamin D either from the sun or from vitamins. The D3 form is preferable, and getting it in a vegan D3 form is even more preferable yet. Oh, this is interesting. At the bottom of the slide, people who had more vitamin D, it stabilized their motor function. But people who ate more vitamin D from food, it made their Parkinson's disease worse. So they're probably getting it from fish oil or vitamin D added to milk, and their Parkinson's disease was actually worse despite higher vitamin D levels. Isn't that interesting? Nutrition's a complicated subject because you have different things influencing each other. Ashwagandha is an ancient herb that's been used for centuries. It's safe. They say in India it makes you strong like a bull and calm like a cow. It was shown to significantly increase dopamine production in brain cells and alleviated gait disorders. And this was in a mouse model of Parkinson's disease reported in the journal Molecules. It seems that ashwagandha is something that can help. I'd like you to do a little further research before jumping into ashwagandha, because you want to make sure it's pure, it's properly processed, it's not contaminated, and that you're taking the correct amount. So work with a professional who understands these things before jumping into taking this. But because the research is so good on it, and because it's generally one of the safest plants used, and a long history and lots of modern science, I thought I should mention it to you tonight. I hope you don't mind. I know modern American medical doctors do not use medical plants or herbs. I just finished, for 35 years, I've been compiling herbal information from around the world. And in fact, from 46 countries and regions around the world. And I just took my database and output it into volume 1 of a book. And it came out to over 6,600 pages with 160,000 footnoted references. Ginkgo biloba, we also used in our study against Alzheimer's disease. The most widely used herb in Europe. What's it used for? Memory problems. It's been found to recover dopamine levels and help tyrosine hydroxylase in the substantia nigra. The neuroprotective effect against neurotoxicity, it even increased our own superoxide radical, our superoxide dismutase production to suppress superoxide radicals. Pardon me? What dose of Ginkgo biloba? In our trial, we were using a standardized extract, which I highly recommend, because plants grow with different sun, nutrients, water, and each leaf may be different from different plants. So we used a standardized extract, and in my book, I tell the exact dose. I have a book, Nutritional Approach to Alzheimer's Disease, and you can check in there for the dose. I'm not going to rely on my recall. I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I don't want to guess. Turmeric's another one. Turmeric's hard to absorb. Very difficult to get this fat-soluble nutrient, the curcuminoids, into the body, even into the bloodstream. We take a little gram capsule of turmeric, and nanograms will get into your blood. Very, very little. However, if you're going to make a curry, and you put several heaping tablespoons of turmeric in the curry and put in some black pepper, because the piperin in the black pepper helps it absorb, then you've got a chance to get some really nice anti-inflammatory effect and a delicious curry at the same time. Again, check my wife's cookbook on Parkinson's disease or her other cookbook for recipes on curry. I just have 3 slides for you on Lewy body dementia. This is particularly annoying when people have trouble thinking and remembering, and about 1/3 of the people with advanced Parkinson's disease can have trouble with this. It may even be a bit more prevalent than that. There's a protein called alpha-synuclein that can form inside certain nerve cells, not just in the substantia nigra, but also in the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, areas of the brain that we use for thinking and memory. And it's very much like the tau tangles in Alzheimer's disease, because that's also abnormal protein growth inside the nerve cells. Coenzyme Q10 was found to inhibit this clumping, and also beta-carotene, found in fruits and vegetables, was found to inhibit the clumping. If you're going to take a supplement, I wouldn't recommend taking beta-carotene by itself, because the science has not shown that to be particularly safe. So for instance, in the supplements, the brain and body food, I put 6 different mixed carotenoids all together, just like food. So they all work together to support each other. Bicolin and bicoline are 2 flavonoids that have been found in bical skullcap, Scutellaria species. This has been used in China for a long time. Skullcap is a sedating herb. It hinders the alpha-synuclein aggregation in Lewy body dementia, the slowing progression, but it does something else. It breaks them up. And this is phenomenal. I mean, just think, if this was a patentable drug that would break up Lewy bodies, you know, we'd all be billionaires. But we don't have to be billionaires. Skullcap's a cheap plant. You can order it online, and you may be able to find it in an herb store here. The leaves made into a tea are a wonderful sedative. They put you to sleep. So you have to be very careful. You don't want to drink skullcap tea and go driving or operating heavy equipment, no bulldozer operation or piloting of aircraft. However, a clever way to do it would be to perhaps make some green tea and some skullcap tea and mix it in just the right proportions so the green tea buzzes you up a little and the skullcap sedates you a little, and they both fight Parkinson's disease. So that's one way to do it, or take it before bed. And then at night, you can be breaking up your alpha-synuclein while you sleep, and it's a wonderful sedative for sleep. At a certain point in my life, I was just working so hard, and my brain was buzzing so much at the end of the day that, I go to bed and just kind of lay there awake. And so I put just a few leaves of skullcap in a little bit of hot water, let it steep for a few minutes and drink it, and the buzz went away. I'm now realizing that, knowing the brain a little better now, that it really reduces excitotoxicity and has some amazing applications in epilepsy as well. It's a whole nother talk. Okay, now I'm going to wrap things up. You want to eat lots of berries, grapes, and other fruit. That's also good for you in many other ways. Increase bell peppers, kale, and cabbage. Okay, bell peppers should be organic. I have to say that because they are heavily sprayed. Include sesame tahini and organic soy products because these protect your dopamine-producing cells. And what we want is for no one in this crowd to lose another dopamine-producing cell. We want to keep all we have. Some of us may only have 30% left. We want to keep all of them. Some of us might have 90% left. Well, we want to keep all those too. That's my goal. Stay away from animal fats and animal protein, which could be summed up to stay away from animal-based foods. And by organic, to avoid pesticides. Spices and supplements, just a wrap up for you. I know there's a lot of information here, and so I do have a book on the table if you want to remember what I've said, and my wife has a matching cookbook. Sedating skullcap and stimulating green tea. Skullcap can also be taken with ginseng, so it's not so sedating. You can adjust the dose very finely, 1 leaf, 2 leaf, 3 leaf, just see how it reacts with you. It's not toxic or anything, but it could send you off to dreamland. Consider ginkgo, turmeric, and ashwagandha if you have Parkinson's disease. If the other things haven't been helpful enough, you could consider using those. Coenzyme Q10 is very useful, only healthful in any case, and only the RRR vitamin E, only the real natural form should you use. Vitamin D could be helpful. And get those minerals, copper, zinc, manganese, and selenium to support our own antioxidant enzymes. Well, I think that we may be time's up here. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you.